Hello, it's Miss Bell again. Today we're going to be talking about chromosomes and cellular reproduction. So here you have a really cool picture of chromosomes, and I want you to notice how there are different sizes and shapes, but you have some that are similar sizes. We're going to be talking about that in a few short seconds. But anyway, so this unit is on how cells reproduce and the role that chromosomes play in that. And if you recall, chromosomes are DNA, and so of course DNA has a central role in reproduction. So first off, before a cell can reproduce, it has to grow. So we're going to talk about how cells grow. So most living cells are going to be anywhere from 2 to 20 micrometers in diameter. They can be much, much larger than that, possibly, depending on the type of cell it is. But anyway, that's just the average. So cells are going to grow throughout their life, and once they reach a certain size, they stop growing and divide. There are a few cells in your body that don't typically divide, and we've talked a little bit about this in class. These cells that don't divide are called which is without, mitotic. So they're without mitosis. So they don't divide. Anyway, so those cells are going to be nerve cells. So if you recall, if you have some sort of accident where you damage your spine, your spinal cord, or possibly your brain, those cells may not recover because if you have a broken bone, for example, so if this is the bone, y'all know I'm not an artist. If that is the bone normally, and then you break it, there's a gap. What happens is new cells are going to fill that gap. So eventually the new cells are going to grow and divide and fill that gap. And then your bone is healed. Sometimes the bone's even a little bit larger than it initially was, but not by much. Probably not enough for you to tell. Anyway, so that's how normal, if you have like to repair a tissue or something, then that's how normally it would happen. Same thing like if you get a cut on your finger, you've killed some cells when you cut it, and there's a separation there, and new cells fill the gap, that separation. So nerve cells can't do that. So that would include, like I said, brain and spinal cord. So if you have a really bad accident and you become paralyzed, then as of right now, there's no real, treatment for that. Sometimes you have to wait it out because the inflammation, the swelling from the initial injury can cause problems. But, and doctors, it's called medical practice because doctors don't always know for sure what's going to happen. But for the most part, they can usually tell based on the injury. So nerve cells are going to be one of those things that do not go through mitosis. So once it's dead or injured, that's probably that. Cardiac muscle cells are another example of this. So cardiac is heart. So like after a heart attack, if those cells die, they do not come back. My dad, he had a massive heart attack at 47, and we were very fortunate. They told us only about 10% of people survive as severe of a heart attack that he had. And so what happens with a heart attack is the blood is blocked from getting to the heart muscle. And so that heart muscle, those heart muscle cells do not get oxygen. They don't get food. And if that goes on for so long, those cells will die. So my husband, before he was a teacher, he did what they call nuclear stress test. So they would take pictures of the heart at rest and then the heart being under stress. So now my dad, when he has one of those done, you can see a part of his heart that's permanently dead. No blood goes to it. because of that, because his cardiac muscle cells are amitotic, just like yours are. So anyway, another example would be mature red blood cells. Now, red blood cells, you're constantly replenishing them. So mature red blood cells, they don't normally divide, but you do have immature red blood cells that do divide, and they form into mature red blood cells. Because red blood cells only have a life cycle of a few months. So even though the red blood cells don't actually divide themselves, they do go from immature to being mature. So there's like different stages of erythrocytes. So anyway, how big a cell can grow is determined by these three things. Diffusion rate. The faster diffusion occurs, then the faster the cell can grow. And the bigger the cell can grow. The amount of DNA available to program the cell's metabolism. Okay, if the DNA is there and ready to tell the cell what to do as far as its metabolism and gaining energy, because you got to have energy in order to grow, then boom, the cell's going to grow well. And then the cell's surface area to volume ratio. Maybe it's a thin cell, maybe it's a thick cell, maybe it's a small cell or a large cell. But whatever the case may be, the greater the surface area to volume ratio, the greater the diffusion, so the cell is able to grow longer or more and faster. So anyway, all these things, the cell has to grow before mitosis can occur. And mitosis is one of the primary cellular reproductions that we're going to be talking about. So anyway, mitosis is important for the cell to survive because it takes one large cell and divides it into two identical smaller cells. And those cells will have identical genetic material. So you're going to take one cell, if it's a human, it would be 46 chromosomes, and divide it into two cells that each have 46 chromosomes. Okay, so that is mitosis and cell division, and we're going to talk more about that. So cell division is another word for cell reproduction. And of course this does happen in humans, but it also happens in other things too. Eukaryotic organisms, so that's not just humans, that's also going to be like plants and protists and fungi. Eukaryotic organisms are going to grow, develop, and repair through mitosis. Okay, so you're going to grow. So I have a daughter, and she is constantly growing through mitosis. We notice when she goes through a growth spurt because she eats a lot more because she needs more energy in order to grow. Development, you can kind of think of development as like learning. And I'm going to use my daughter as another example. She learned how to talk. She learned how to walk. You probably can hear her right now in the other room because she's crying to come in here with me. She's learned how to feed herself, how to drink out of a cup. All these things babies have to learn. As she gets older, she'll learn other skills like learning how to write. Or I said walk. At your age, you might be learning how to drive soon. So these are all developmental skills. So you can think of development as like learning or learning skills. And then repair. I mentioned repair earlier when I talked about the broken bone. So you do all that through mitosis. Now, bacteria cells, if you recall, bacteria are your only example of prokaryotic cells or prokaryotes. Okay, and they reproduce through binary fission. Binary fission is very, very simple. That's what you're seeing down here in this picture. Okay, so binary fission, there we go, is asexual, meaning one parent. So you have one cell. If you look in the picture, you have one cell, and it is dividing out its DNA. That's the circle. So it's dividing out the DNA in the center. Y'all see that? It's got DNA and it's got a plasmid, which are both genetic components. They're dividing out, and then it's pinching off into two new cells. Okay? And so if you look here now, I started with one bacteria, now I have two. It's very simple because bacteria, all they have inside of them is DNA, ribosomes, and cytoplasm. So they just double their DNA pretty much and then split in two. So it's much faster than mitosis. Anyway, so it's one parent. So one parent passes the exact copy of its DNA to its offspring. So this does produce clones. So any type of asexual reproduction is going to produce identical offspring, which is in fact a clone. So anyway, then you have another type, another main type of cell division. There are a few others we're going to talk about that are asexual and even another that's sexual. But for the these are the main ones that you'll hear about. The 1, 2, 3 here. So anyway, the formation of gametes. That is the other one. Okay, so gametes are going to be your sex cells. Okay, so like in humans, that's going to be the sperm and egg. Okay, or like in plants, that would be like pollen. Anyway, so these are your gametes, your sex cells, and that is a special type of reproduction. So that is called meiosis. And if it's easier for you to think of it as meiosis, then you can think of it that way. But the correct is meiosis. Anyway, all three of these have in common that they all revolve around DNA and getting their DNA into the daughter cells or the resulting cells. So the resulting cells are called daughter cells. So if you can see here, this cell right here is undergoing, it's going to split. Y'all see that? That's an animal cell. So anyway. So there's two main types of cells in eukaryotic organisms. It's very important that you understand the difference between these. So you have body cells and sex cells. So body cell, another name for them is a somatic cell. This is every cell except for sperm and egg. So a somatic cell is any cell in your body except for your sex cells. Okay, so this could be anything. It could be skin, bone, muscle, liver, blood cells, but brain. In a plant, it could be the leaf, the stem, the roots. It could be anything but the sperm or egg. So that is your body cells. Okay, and this is very important for you to know. Body cells, you must know, have a normal number of chromosomes, which we call it diploid. Okay, now sex cells are the other type of cell in your body. They're also known as gametes or reproductive cells. They have half the normal number of chromosomes, which is haploid. Okay, that's very important for you to know. Diploid, you might see it as 2N, and haploid is just N. Okay, the reason why sex cells are haploid is because they are the only cells, now listen to this, they are the only cells made to combine with another cell, and they're going to combine with another sex cell. Okay, so for example, a body cell, a skin cell. Okay, think about your skin. If you just look down at your hand, one skin cell is not going to combine with another skin cell. They're going to sit right next to each other. They might even communicate, like nerve cells communicate, one right next to the other. But they never combine. The only cells made to combine are going to be your sex cells. Okay, so like sperm and egg in the case of humans. Okay, so we have our sperm, which has 23 chromosomes. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so that's my sperm. It's going to combine with my egg, which has 23 chromosomes. And then you get the baby, which has 46 chromosomes in all their cells. Okay, so you're not going to get, you get 50% from mom, that's dad, 50% from dad, and 50% from mom to get the 100% in the baby. Okay, so this is why sexual reproduction involves two parents, and it also involves genetically different organisms. Whereas your body cells are all going to have the same DNA, but your sex cells are going to be different because they only have half the normal number of chromosomes. If this was, if you had a sperm that had 46 in it, sorry, that's an ugly one, and then an egg that had 46 in it, then the baby would have 92. That's not normal. So in order to have a normal number of chromosomes, which is diploid, you combine two haploids. So the only cells that are haploid are sex cells, ever. Everything else is diploid. Diploid is your normal number. Do not think of diploid as double. Diploid, it does have a 2, di does mean 2, but what diploid means is, looking at my chromosomes, I have 23 pair of chromosomes. Well, let's look at chromosome pair number 12. Okay, I got one number 12 from my mom and one number 12 from my dad. So it's the same genetic content, but not exactly the same. So for example, number 12 might have a gene on it for eye color, but mom might have gave me blue and dad might have gave me brown. Okay, so it's going to be still the same stuff on the chromosome, it just might be different variations of that trait. So that brings us to chromosomes. We already kind of started talking about it, but we'll talk about it a little more now. So earlier, when we talked about cells in a previous unit, we talked a little bit about chromosomes and chromatin. I told you DNA has two main forms, chromosomes or chromatin. Okay, pretty simple. Chromosomes are over here. They are the X's. Chromatin looks like spaghetti or silly string, and it's all unraveled. Okay, I want you to note that they are both still double helixes. You look very closely, you can see the double helix there. Okay, so if you think of a slinky, if you pull the slinky out, that's more like chromatin. Okay, it's more unwound. Like an unwound slinky. But if you push the slinky back in, that's going to shorten and thicken the DNA. If you push the slinky in, and then you would get your chromosome. Okay, so for this reason, you see the genetic information on the chromosome. Okay, so now chromatin is DNA, but you also have some proteins in there with the chromatin. Interphase is most of the cell's life cycle, and in interphase it is chromatin, N. Okay, so you can never see chromatin, and that's because it's unwound. Okay, and the only way you can ever see DNA is under an electron microscope, and that will be when it's chromosomes. Okay, so you're more often to see DNA during cell division because that's when it's chromosomes. All right, what structures carry the most genetic information for a leaf cell? Well, hopefully you recall that genetic information is in DNA, and DNA is a chromosome. Which of the structures labeled below contains the chromosomes? Well, hopefully you know that's the nucleus, which is C. So looking at a chromosome, this is the X's, and this is how mostly DNA is going to exist during cell division. There's two major parts, the chromatids and the centromere. Okay, so your centromere is in the center, okay? And then you have your chromatids. So if you look, the V's, if you want to make an X, you could take two V's and put them together. So anyway, the V's are the sister chromatids. So the chromatin, like I said, it's going to coil up into two identical parts of the chromosome, and that's called the sister chromatids. So like I said, they're going to be identical. So it's going to have your eyesight, two of your eyesight genes maybe, or two of your hair color genes. Anyway, so the centromere is where the chromatids are attached. So that's just that central portion where the chromatids are attached to. And they're held together by something called a spindle fiber. So there's actually these little fibers that are holding the chromatids to the centromere. All right, what is structure Q? Well, hopefully you picked centromere. So chromosome numbers. So we already kind of started talking about this a little bit when we talked about haploid and diploid, but there's a few things to go over. So all sexually reproducing organisms are going to have pairs of chromosomes. So if it's sexually reproducing, it has two parents. So that means you get one chromosome from each parent, which means your chromosomes are paired up. So remember, plants can be sexually reproducing too, or fungi for that matter. So organisms can have lots of different numbers of chromosomes. They can have anywhere from 2 chromosomes to over 300 or even more. Ferns, which are a much simpler organism than, like a human is, have 1,262 chromosomes. So that's just an example for you. You don't have to know that. But each organism is usually going to have a specific number of chromosomes, and the number of genes, like the fern, might only have one gene on each chromosome, whereas humans have lots of genes on each chromosome. So anyway, homologous chromosomes. Okay, this is very important. Homologous, okay, you might remember, or sometimes they call them homologs. Homo means same or similar. Okay, and homologous chromosomes is referring to those pairs of chromosomes. Okay, so those pairs of chromosomes, like we said, you get one from each parent. Okay, each one comes from one of the two parents. Okay, and they're going to have similar size, shape, and genetic content. So if you recall that picture I showed you on the very beginning of this video, I told you to notice the shape and the size of the chromosomes, and notice there were some that were real little and some that were bigger. Well, your chromosomes are numbered based on their size and shape. So if number 1, if you look at chromosome number 1 versus number 23, you'll notice they change in size. So anyway, they also are paired up based on, you got one number 1 from mom and one number 1 from dad. So I got one number 4 from mom and one number 4 from my dad. And so I got a gene from each parent for, let's say, my height. I got one gene from each parent for my height. Or at least one gene. We'll just say that, because when we get to genetics, we'll talk about that. But anyway, my daughter, for example, my husband has brown eyes, and I have like a blue-green color eyes. My daughter has brown eyes. But I know she got a gene from me, so she would have gotten either a blue or a green gene from me. Human genetics is very complicated. It's much more complicated than what I'm putting to you right now. And we're going to talk more about that in our genetics unit. After this unit, we will begin getting into genetics. So just hold your horses on those questions. Anyway, so with homologous chromosomes, in humans, you have 46 chromosomes. Okay, in humans, in your body cells, in your somatic cells. Okay, that is considered the diploid number. Okay, so that means in my body, in my skin cells, I have 23 chromosomes from my mom and 23 from my dad. So that makes 46 chromosomes in every one of my body cells. Okay? So that is homologous chromosomes. That brings us to diploid and haploid. I've already touched on this some, but here's where it's like actually written out. So diploid is not double. Let me start with that. Diploid is not double, but haploid is half. Okay? Diploid is the normal number of chromosomes for that organism. So the diploid number for humans is 46. You do need to know that figure, 46. Okay, so in human somatic cells, you have a diploid number, 46 chromosomes, unless you have some sort of genetic condition. Like my uncle has Down syndrome, so he actually has 47 chromosomes. But anyway, the diploid number in a normal human somatic cell, body cell, is going to be 46, because you got 23, you got set 1 through 23 from your mom, and you got a second set 1 through 23 from your dad. So they use 2N because you got 2 sets of chromosomes. And again, that's from each parent. So be very careful of wording, because I could ask you how many chromosomes humans have, which would be 46. But if I ask you how many pairs of chromosomes, that would be 23. Okay, so watch out for that word pair, because a pair is 2, so you're going to have to times 2. Of course, 23 times 2 is 46. So if we're talking about how many pairs, it's 23 pair. If we're talking about how many chromosomes, it's 46. So just watch the wordings. So then you have haploid. Haploid is half. So your sex cells, your gametes, sperm and egg, are only going to have one set of chromosomes. And they are said to be haploid. Okay, we're going to talk about how they split up when we go over meiosis, which is also in this unit. So the haploid number, the only cells that are haploid are your sex cells. Okay, that's it. The only ones. Okay, so if you look here, you can see the haploid chromosome is half, and there's my diploid. Okay, and again, that's because my sperm plus my egg makes the baby with the normal number. Okay, because these are the only cells made to combine. So the combining of those gametes, those haploid cells, is called fertilization. So fertilization can be seen in this picture, where the sperm is actually penetrating the egg. Okay, so there is a mechanism. I know what everybody always asks. Oh, this is more than one sperm. There is a mechanism where once one sperm penetrates the egg, it kind of blocks any other sperm from coming in. So there's a mechanism for that. So only one sperm actually makes it, and once it gets through, then nothing else can come through. And then the DNA of the sperm will combine with the DNA of the egg. Once that happens, it's called a fertilized egg or a zygote. Okay, so those are important vocab terms, fertilization and zygote. So here you have a zygote. Okay, if you can see, you can count 4 cells. Y'all see that? Because that zygote, once it's fertilized, it will divide and divide and divide. And so then 2 becomes 4, and 4 becomes 8, and 8 becomes 16, and it grows through exponential growth. And that zygote will become a baby. So it is the first cell of a new individual. So zygote is essentially conception. When you form that zygote, so fertilization is when like a baby is conceived. So anyway, zygotes, how they grow and how they divide into a bigger baby, into a embryo, is through mitosis. So meiosis only makes the sperm, or so in a male body, meiosis makes the sperm. Meiosis makes the egg in the female body. Okay, but you can go through meiosis your whole life and never have a child. Okay, because you have to have fertilization to occur. They actually have to join. And so when they do join and fertilization occurs and you get that zygote, after that it's mitosis. No more meiosis, it's mitosis to grow into a baby. The cells in the embryo start out as stem cells. All the cells in the embryo start out as stem cells. And then eventually they differentiate into all the cells that you have today. And that's going to be in the embryonic stage. So right now I'm 20 weeks pregnant. And so I'm well past the embryonic stage. That's the first 8 weeks. So I'm well past that. Stem cells are considered undifferentiated. They are cells that can become any other cell in the body. There is some research that people would love to do in replacing unhealthy cells with stem cells. We do this some with bone marrow transplants, but adults simply don't have a lot of stem cells, and children, they don't have a lot of stem cells. They don't have these embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells are different than the stem cells in your body. The stem cells in your body can only become like blood cells. But the embryonic stem cells can become any cell in the body. So that's a hot topic as far as research goes, because researchers think that if you put stem cells where you're paralyzed, where your spinal cord's injured, because those nerve cells are amitotic, then those stem cells could potentially grow there and heal that injury. The problem with using embryonic stem cells becomes a ethical or moral issue, because in order to get the embryonic stem cells, it will kill the embryo. So then you get into the debate of, when does life begin, and are you killing life, and are you playing God? And that's not a debate to have in science class, but that is something to just be aware of, that's why people debate it, because everyone has different opinions on that. And you have to form your own opinion on that, of what you feel like is acceptable. So chromosomes can determine your sex, or they can determine your other characteristics. So we mentioned before, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes. 22 of those pairs are called autosomes. So you need to know this number as well. 22 pairs are autosomes, and then one pair are your sex chromosomes. And this is going to make sense once we talk about it. So autosomes are going to be your chromosomes, okay? Some. So autosomes or chromosomes. Don't get that confused with a somatic cell. Somatic cells are cells in your body, like liver, bone, whatever. Autosomes are chromosomes. Those are two commonly mixed up things. Anyway, autosomes are chromosomes that do not determine your gender or gender-related characteristics. So the things that make you male and female, they don't determine that. Like eye color. Both male and females have eye color. They have hair color. They have heights and things like that. Autosomes are those kind of traits. Then you have your sex chromosomes. Sex chromosomes, there's only one pair of them, of your 23 pairs. They have your genes that determine the sex of the person and those sex-related characteristics. And a lot of those characteristics are present at birth, but then when you go through puberty, those genes get activated, and then you get more distinctive male and female characteristics. So anyway, your two sex chromosomes depend on if you're a boy or a girl. You've probably learned this before. Males are XY. Females are XX. So, I'm a female. So my chromosomes are XX. I actually have a karyotype of my chromosomes. I'll have to remember to post it for you guys to see. I have a karyotype of mine and my husband's, because before we had my daughter, we had 2 miscarriages, and they sent us to a geneticist to be sure that we didn't have a chromosomal issue, and fortunately our chromosomes were normal. But anyway, I have the karyotypes. It's really cool, and it looks very similar to this. This is a karyotype, this picture here. A karyotype is just a picture of your chromosomes. Make sure you have the right number of them. Make sure there's not a piece broken off or any kind of mutation. But anyway, in here you can see that a boy this is a boy because it's XY. So I'm a girl. I have XX. So, like, if I'm having a child, my only option is to give the child an X, because all I have is 2 X's. Whereas my husband, he had an X or a Y. So our first child was a girl. She got XX. Our second child is a boy. He is XY. And we actually had a blood test done earlier in my pregnancy, to where they took my blood, and they can see, once the placenta is developed, the baby's blood mixes apparently with the mom's blood, and they looked at some of his cells, and they found Y chromosomes, so they knew that he is a boy. And they also tested for some major chromosomal defects. Unfortunately, he is healthy as far as that's concerned. And but anyway, they were able to see that he had a Y chromosome. So if there was any Y chromosomes present in my blood, they'd know the baby was a male, because I'm already a female. Anyway, so because I can only donate an X to my child, the sex of the baby, the gender of the baby, is determined by the father. because the father can donate either an X or a Y. That's what I'm getting at. So this is your one pair. Like I said, the sex chromosomes, you have one pair. One pair. Okay, so if you're a boy, you have XY. That's your pair. If you're a girl, you have XX. That's your pair. The rest of your chromosomes are going to be autosomes. Okay, so I want you to take a look at this karyotype picture right here too. We'll talk more about karyotypes later. But again, it's just a picture of your chromosomes. Okay, so notice how the chromosomes are arranged by size and shape. Okay, so they're bigger here and they get smaller as you get down to the last pair of autosomes. Okay, so they're arranged by size, shape, and genetic content. So for example, chromosome number 20. I'm not a geneticist, so I don't know what genes are on chromosome number 20, so I'm just going to make one up. Let's say chromosome number 20 has the gene for hair color. Okay, so then this gene will have a gene, this chromosome will have a gene from my mom for hair color, and this chromosome will have a gene from my dad from hair color. And with genetics, it just depends on if it's dominant or recessive, which one you see. Or both parents might have gave the same. My husband and I both have dark hair, so I'm sure both of our kids will have dark hair. My daughter does. It would be very improbable for her to, or our son to not have dark hair. Okay, so that brings us to the cell cycle. So we got to talk about all the DNA and chromosomes and all that before we get to cell reproduction, because like I said earlier, that's a central part of cell reproduction. You have to know what's going on with the DNA because the DNA controls everything in the cell. So the cell cycle is essentially the cell's life cycle. Okay, this is the life cycle of a eukaryotic cell. Okay. So the cell is always in one phase of the cell cycle. It goes through the cell cycle and then it will begin through the cell cycle again. And there's three main phases. You do need to know these three main phases and what happens in each one of them. And we will talk about that through the rest of these notes. So, as before we mentioned, we talked about cell growth. A cell can only grow as big as it can get, and then it's going to be stimulated to divide, one cell becoming two cells. So once it does that, that is mitosis. So interphase is going to be mainly when it grows. Then mitosis is the nucleus dividing. And then cytokinesis is the rest of the cell dividing. And then once the cell totally divides, it goes back into interphase. The two new cells do. So the cell cycle is an important definition for you to know. The cell cycle is a repeating sequence of both growth and division during the life of the cell. So the cell is always in one of these parts of the cell cycle. And it is a cycle, so it is repeating over and over and over. So anyway, a cell spends 90% of its life in the first three phases, which is going to be interphase. Interphase has three phases, so I just want to clarify that. So if you look, G1, S, and G2 are the first three phases because they are part of interphase. Okay, so the cell cycle has three phases: interphase, mitosis, cytokinesis. Interphase has three parts: G1, S, G2, three main parts. Then you have mitosis, which is the nuclear division. Very important you understand mitosis does not divide the cell. It is only the nucleus dividing out because that's where all the important stuff is. Then cytokinesis finishes dividing out the cell and the cytoplasm. So you don't get two separate cells until after cytokinesis. Then after cytokinesis, the cell will begin interphase again. When using a light microscope, which of the following structures is first visible when a cell is dividing? Okay, hopefully you'll know that chromosomes are. The ongoing process in which cells grow, develop, and reproduce is called what? Okay, interkinesis, we're not talking about that. Meiosis is making of sex cells, does not mention sex cells. Mitosis is the nucleus dividing, not just, and it doesn't involve growing. So the cell cycle is that ongoing process. So that brings us to interphase. So interphase is the busiest and longest part of the cell cycle. And the primary thing there's two primary things that happen in interphase. Throughout all of the parts of interphase, the cell is going to grow. The other thing is going to be your DNA is doubled. It's replicated, it's copied. The more technical term is replication, DNA replication, or chromosome replication. So you'll see the word replicating because you're making a replica. You're doubling the DNA. So anyway, this happens in interphase. Interphase has to happen before mitosis. Before mitosis can begin, you got to copy your chromosomes. Remember, you're taking one cell that has 46 chromosomes and splitting it into two cells with 46 chromosomes. Okay, in order for that to happen, you got to double your DNA. So in interphase, you will double your DNA to 92 before it can then mathematically split into two cells with 46. That math makes a little more sense, right? Because you can't split 46 and get 46 and 46, two 46s. You have to double that DNA first. Okay, so this will be before. Okay, so this will be during interphase. And this will be after mitosis. Okay, you would get your two cells with 46 chromosomes each, and that would be during cytokinesis. So anyway, interphase has to happen before mitosis so that you copy your DNA, you double your DNA, so that you have enough DNA to go into your two new cells you're eventually going to make. So humans have 46 chromosomes. So during interphase, it will double to 92 chromosomes so that they can have 46 in each cell. In interphase, DNA is in the form of chromatin. Interphase chromatin. Okay, and it will not be visible during that phase. Okay, so there's either 3 or 4 distinctive phases during interphase. Just move that. You can see all of it. Okay, and I say 3 or 4 because it depends on the type of cell. Anyway, so the first phase, and they all go through this, is G1 or gap 1. The G's stand for gap. Okay, so the G1, and actually it's like a subscript like that. It's just a pain to do that in the PowerPoints. But anyway, so it's called, the first phase is gap 1. And anytime you see a G, pretty much every phase actually, the cell's gonna grow, except for this one we're going to talk about in a minute. So in G1, the cell grows and you make more organelles. Okay, you got to have more ER, more Golgi, more mitochondria, and those things in order to have enough to go into two new cells. Because remember, this is cell division, this is cell reproduction. Your goal is to make new cells. Take one cell and make two cells. So anyway, G1 lasts about 8 to 10 hours. Then you might have cells that have the G0 phase. Might. Not all cells do this. Okay. Usually this is combined with G1. G0 is a rest phase. I like to think of it as zero happens because it basically is a stage of dormancy or inactivity. It does not grow, divide, or prepare to divide in any way. So like I said, G0, zero happens pretty much. Nothing really happens. It's dormant, it's inactive, it doesn't grow, it doesn't prepare in any way. And the cells that usually do this are those amitotic cells, those cells that do not undergo mitosis. Okay, they stay in that G0 phase pretty much their whole life cycle. They do have longer lifespans than other cells do, but they do not divide. Like for example, nerve cells have a much longer life cycle than like your skin cells, because your skin cells are constantly dying, and then you slough them off, and then new skin cells replace it. Then you have the S phase. The S phase is a key phase of interphase. It's very important. You must know that during the S phase, DNA is replicated. Okay, S stands for synthesis. So you are synthesizing more DNA. This is where you take your 46 and it becomes 92. So it's a very key phase. So also the cell will grow, because that's going to happen in all the phases of interphase. So the cell continues to grow and DNA is doubled at this point. It goes from 46 to 92. Now it's still chromatin, and this takes about 6 to 8 hours. And then after that, the cell will go into G2 or gap 2. Again, the cell will grow because it grows in all the parts of interphase except for that if it goes into G0. It's also going to prepare for mitosis, and then it will synthesize proteins, and it's going to continue making more organelles, and this is 4 to 6 hours. So most cells are going to go through G1, S, and then G2. So that's phase 1, 2, 3. G1, S, G2. Okay, so most cells in interphase consist of G1, S, and G2, except for the exception of those that go through gap 0. So G1, S, and G2 are all parts of what? Okay, so here's a cell cycle. We got G1, S, G2. Then you got mitosis, cytokinesis. So what are G1, S, and G2 all parts of? Hopefully you picked interphase because those are the 3 phases of interphase.